Welcome to Marketing. Grab some coffee and let's talk about what's working in marketing, who these strategies are designed for, and how to be customer-centric while we do it.
This is Leanne with Markegy. Today I'm joined by Robyn Showers. She is the director of content at Apollo.io. With Robyn, we have a special guest cameo. We have Calvin the cat. So if you hear meowing or purring, conversely, it's from him. Please enjoy. Uh, on that note, Robyn, tell us more about you and your career and kind of like how you got to be where you are today.
Absolutely. And Leanne, thank you so much for having me on today. This is so fun. And thank you for having Calvin as well, obviously.
Obviously.
My name is Robyn, and actually I am very new at Apollo.io. I just started. And I'm really excited to be joining the team over there. They're doing some incredible things with community-based marketing. Their content is already incredible. The team is fantastic. There are a lot of reasons that I decided to join, and I'm just really excited to be on board. Before that, I have been in some form of marketing for going on 15 years now, which makes me feel really old to say out loud, but that is true. And I've been in SaaS for about a decade. So I got my start in SaaS at HubSpot when I moved to Boston to join HubSpot and lead social media and learn basically drinking from a fire hose about inbound marketing. It's kind of funny to me, actually. That it's so full circle, coming around to kind of another, like, big growing company that is trying to disrupt go-to-market, in a very different way, being like an all-in-one sales engine. So, after HubSpot, I, was at several different startups here in the DC area, which is where I am today. Then moved up to New York for a little bit and was at Vimeo for the past 5.5 years. And so then just really recently, I took a bit of a career sabbatical for a couple of months and I just landed at Apollo and I'm excited to kind of hit the ground running. I feel very refreshed after a lot of like pottery classes and yoga and job hunting, obviously, but like in
Yeah.
between, a lot of time doing my own thing, which was really nice.
Yeah. There's so much good that can come from having off time, whether you're still in a role or you're between roles. And I think that's what makes our creative juices flow is the a time for our brains to process things and connect the dots and make new connections between, neurons and whatnot to get like super geeky about it. But that's why
100%.
that's why we need like writing pads in the showers. We're marketers. We don't think in a cubicle. We think on a walk. Um and thinking about the structure of, you've been at some pretty big places as far as like content drivers, right? We like HubSpot disrupted inbound and inbound was like a big deal to a lot of us. And then Vimeo video content, like they can't just be,
It's kind of what we
a
do
landing
now.
page.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm really excited to see how Apollo goes forward with this, especially under your watch. Um, Tell me more about kind of I want you to get on your soapbox about content and like defining it or like where it belongs in the marketing department, just different things that you've seen.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. This is something I've been thinking about a lot recently, mostly because I feel like the past couple of years, content sorry, I'm trying to like rewind back to why I think this has started. So, but I'll finish the sentence first. I think the last couple of years, content has started to shift a lot as a focal point in marketing. I think at the same time, a couple of different things are happening. One is that this unstoppable SEO engine that if we pump enough content into, traffic will come out is changing, right? And like that for a while really became a lot of people's content marketing strategy. And so that is shifting. And so the makeup of what your content strategy needs to look like is shifting with it. I think at the same time, we are also seeing a return to brand, which in my opinion is really good news for content marketers. We're seeing a return to, oh, actually, it doesn't just matter that we're able to target the right people or that we're able to measure those things. Those are obviously incredibly important, but it also matters that when we actually get in front of them, we have the message that is going to resonate. And that's where great content comes in. And then I think at the same time, you have a marketing department with a lot of different focus points, and I've been trying to get a list of just 5 or 6 of the main ones across marketing departments, and I haven't gotten there yet because it's really difficult. Different departments do or functions do different things depending on the team, depending on the size, depending on, like, the engine behind it, and I do think that because content, like brand, is kind of in everything. It's the hub of your marketing strategy. Actual content marketing practitioners have gotten stuck in this weird loop where we're kind of being shuffled between departments. Nobody's really totally sure where to put us because there are a lot of places that content is needed, is needed, can go, makes sense, and it just depends on the overall marketing strategy. And so that means at some companies, I have worked under demand gen. At other companies, actually, same company, different time, I've reported directly into the CMO. At other times, I've reported into a more cross functional leader who led sort of a different business unit. At times, I've owned social media. Other times, I haven't owned social media. Sometimes I own customer marketing. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes email rolls up into content. Like, you see where I'm going here, that it completely depends on the company, which is really interesting to me. But one thing that I guess this is my soapbox. Here's the crux of it right here. One thing I feel really, really passionate about is that when content has to serve a master other than the customer, things go wrong. So I feel really passionate about the fact that content should either, as far as organizational structure goes, should either report directly into the head of marketing or at least should be directly related to a core customer brand function. Because I do think that even though it is the driver behind demand gen, I think it's what can help paid do better. Like, I do think most channels rely on really great content, but if content is placed uh, at the feet of any of those channels, it becomes a services industry. It's stripped of its strategic value, and it's really, really hard for any content leader in that position to kind of push back against those kinds of pressures. So that's my soapbox, is that content is strategic and we should have a bigger seat at the table.
I love it. And here's what sticks out to me the most is that it has to serve the customer. And to me, the way I see content is that it's like you said, it's the manifestation of the brand, right? So brand is this like esoteric like theory, like, it's a very tangible thing, but it's not it's where it gets played out. How is it demonstrated? It's the telling of and the showing of the concepts that the brand is. And that does touch everything. And that is social, that is email, that is all of these things. But then how is it delivered and who's in charge of it? And those parts and how do you divide up the labor? Gets to be kind of dicey.
100%. Yeah, I like to say that brand is how people feel about your company, right? Brand is how you are making people feel about your company, and I think that it manifests itself in the product for sure. I'm also really passionate about microcopy and content design, even though I've never worked in that field. I just think, like, you can tell when a company has invested in that. But then it also manifests itself, yeah, in your content, in your website, in what you choose to write about, in the care that you put behind the research, in how much you are invested in your customer success, especially in B2B. Obviously, that changes in B2C. I think it's similar. Like, you feel an attachment to the product for being so good, and then you also feel an attachment to the brand for, like, making you feel like a certain person. But obviously it's different. The corollaries are a little different.
I mean, they're similar because we're all human, right? So
Exactly.
the champion on the buying committee needs to feel like they are of a certain stature or approved by their peers, or, they need to have some sort of validation in order to accomplish their job of what their like actual job is, but also your hope for them that they adopt your thing.
Yeah, I
If you
think
make them feel like shit, they're not going to do it.
sometimes a business software purchase is actually more emotional than a consumer purchase, you know? It says something about who you are as a professional. A lot of people care deeply about their careers, for better and worse, right? We probably shouldn't tie our careers as closely to our identity as most of us do, as I certainly have been guilty of doing. Um, but yeah, I actually think it's a very emotional process buying software. Um, I don't know if is that the soundbite? Did we do it?
We're gonna do it
Software's
like 10 times.
emotional.
It is emotional,
Yeah,
like, because no one wants to feel stupid, no one wants to, and especially at the enterprise level, like, nobody wants to be the person that 5 years from now, everyone's like, "Yeah, that was that software that Chad picked out, and it's such a wreck. What a nightmare that was implementing, and now it's just why do we even have this? I wish we could replace it, but it was too expensive." Nobody wants to be
no.
that person.
One of the most revealing things is searching for your brand on Reddit and finding what people are saying in the recesses, and you're like, "Oh god, this is brand. This is brand also." It's usually negative, but it's also brand, and you have
It's
to pay
customer
attention to it.
service. I argue that if you have a customer care team, that they need to have Reddit profiles.
Yeah, I
Uh,
completely agree. Yeah.
I hope they never have to use it. I mean, to some extent, like, you've made it when Reddit thinks you're shit. Uh, at the same time, maybe you found the nice side of Reddit that, is, like a unicorn. It's out there somewhere.
I think slash cats is I'll
Yes.
speak for Calvin, is pretty nice.
Wholesome memes. There's a wholesome meme
There you
subreddit.
go.
That one's actually pretty good.
Buy it for
Uh,
life, I'm a big fan of. Just
yeah.
just people recommending stuff that doesn't break. Cool.
Exactly.
Nice.
So there is the warm fuzzy side of Reddit, and hopefully your brand finds it. Um, we'll just ignore the like other ones.
Oh,
Like,
yeah. We will.
am I the asshole for hanging up on this customer care person after I asked for the 10 time? Yeah, you might be, but
The Am I the Asshole posts are they're usually the asshole, and if not, pretty much everyone always sucks.
yeah, yeah. I love that it's blown up, but like that's the power of Reddit enabling its users to have this prompt that, they come up with the subreddits, and that's part of their brand now. It's
Yeah.
like Ask Me Anything. AMA used to be branded by subreddit. So you couldn't like hop on LinkedIn and be like AMA. You had to be like Ask Me Anything. You had to spell it all the way out.
Yeah.
Um so content was a huge driver for them. User generated content is their crux of their business model.
100%. Yeah. But I also think like that shift speaks to what's happening in B2B marketing too, right? It's like over the last 15 years, buyers just get more and more power each year. More and more of the buying process is happening on dark social, sorry. Or like, yeah, in the bowels of Reddit, in Slack channels, like in places where there's just people talking to people, and a lot of what ends up driving their recommendations are, obviously whether or not your product actually delivers what it says. Like you also have to build a good product. There's no good marketing with a bad product. It's just that's my opinion. I mean, I'm sure that's debatable. I'm sure people would debate that, but that's what I think. And then, yeah, how their content makes you feel. I think that idea of a content brand, like there are some companies that you have never bought their product, but you know of them because of the fact that their content was so good. And so they made you feel a certain way. And now you think of them when you actually are in the market for that product.
Absolutely. To your point about it's all about messaging and positioning. If your product sucks, but like it's a gag present, like Shake Weight, Shake Weight made a lot of money after a completely useless piece of metal, and plastic. I don't know exactly what it's made of. But like at the same time, it comes back to accurately having a unique position and demonstrating that position with supporting marketing materials and content.
Yeah.
Um
I think that's a really good point actually, because Obviously, with something like shake weight, the stakes are pretty low, right? It's not a huge yeah, it's not a your company didn't dump a ton of money or, like, you didn't du yeah, like, and it is a funny product, but I your your point about it being about positioning, even if you have sometimes a product is a shit product because you're overpromising, right? Like, don't promise me that this product does 10 things when it really only does 1 well. It's better to focus on the one and then build out the other things as you do them better. Um, but I mean, but on the other hand, we're definitely in an economy where we want to move towards like, I don't want to use a billion tools. I want to use just a handful.
Yeah.
So there's yeah, the companies that are actually doing lots of different things well and finding ways to knit them together um, are going to have a huge advantage.
Yeah, I think integrations is one of the biggest advantages right now. As somebody who was vetting vendors for like an entire tech stack, it's all about the integrations between legacy products and up and coming products, and then stability. And then how did I come across them? I was the um the gold rush miner looking in the excavating the hillside, like tick tick tick, where's something cool and new that we actually need that's useful. And so, how did I come across things? Only a handful of ways. And it was content. If I saw something on G2 that told me that someone's experience was something, or even the description on G2, or who it was compared against, um, or then going to a webinar or webinars, webinars. Is we're not going to chase that one right the second, but
Oh, it sounds
sometimes
like you got a spicy take. I want to hear it.
everyone hates webinars. They hate them.
All right, yeah.
They hate them. Like, and they're just different levels of suck. And like the only good webinar I've been to was actually a course in disguise.
There you go. That is the key.
It just was. A
Mhm.
pitch in disguise is not a webinar.
Nope. Mm-mm.
Like,
Respect people's time. It is a big deal to take, like, to anybody yeah, people watching this, thank you, because it's a big deal to take time out of your day to sit down and watch something. Um,
yeah, I
yeah,
appreciate your attention. Thank
yeah.
you. Um, so so coming back to this theme of content marketing and it not falling under demand gen or necessarily under one of these other umbrellas, what are like tell me more about how that goes right and how that goes wrong.
Meaning,
Like
oh,
where to
like
place
about
it. Yeah, yeah, like in
yeah.
execution.
Yeah, and it really does it's tricky. I mean, org structure is always tricky, and I just wanna, like, preface by saying that most organizations as especially as they're growing, and most of the companies I've joined have been companies that, in the tech sector, that's the goal, that we're growing, and so changing a lot, and your org has to change with it, right? When your strategy changes, your organizational structure needs to match that, but I do think that a lot of times the reasoning behind bucketing content under demand gen well, it's 2 reasons. One is that demand gen needs a lot of content. Um, so that makes total sense. Like they need this to do their jobs. Therefore, like we'll put everyone on the same team. And I'm not opposed to a pod structure either. Like I'll put a pin in that. Like I think that can actually work really well when you have squads or pods or something where you're putting a bunch of different cross-functional marketers in one group and giving them a solid goal. But the problem with bucketing it I think the problem with bucketing it under other functions where they have the goal and content is just basically a services team helping them is that you make it well you do a couple of things like career growth wise you definitely chop those marketers off at the knees right like oh god that was very violent I should have found a different way to say that but you really hinder their career growth because it's a very different thing to be creating programs and strategies to use content to solve a problem, which is what I think content marketers should be doing and what I look for when I'm looking for new roles. as opposed to I am now a purely creative professional, which isn't bad either, but they're just very different paths, right? I'm a purely creative professional. I've been given a brief that's been completely thought out by someone else, and I'm now delivering on that brief. And I think that when that happens, what you've robbed yourself of is that person who is kind of thinking about all of the different ways that content can be used, that person who's taking into account all of the different ways that people consume content on different channels and platforms, and like putting that into the top of the research cycle. So you end up with a lot of, I mean, that's frankly, okay. I'm gonna take a stab. I think that's why so many webinars suck, because most webinars are run by demand gen teams who have a quota to hit, and they want to get to the pitch as quickly as possible. And I some demand gen teams are incredible at content. There are people who go back and forth between functions all the time, but I do think that when the main goal of the team is we have to hit this particular quota rather than we need to help customers and we're measuring against that. I do think that that's where we fall short. I think you need activation metrics, you need view rates, you need to have like something built into that measurement system that helps you figure out if the content is any good. And too many times demand gen teams have it set up so that if they hit the gate and sign up for whatever the thing is, that's enough. That's like the end of where the team cares. And that's where this goes horribly, horribly wrong. Because then what the content marketer has done doesn't even matter, right? Like, really, you could have just hired a copywriter to lie on the, not that copywriters, that's what copywriters do, but just like it's not. But that's what you could have done, right? Like, you could have just like put up a fake landing page at that point and like delivered. And I feel like a lot of companies actually end up doing that. They deliver like a one pager when you thought you were getting a huge research report. Or yeah, you've been there, right?
Yeah, and I
The thin
understand the
content.
temptation. I so get the temptation to do that, and I get that there are so many cheap and easy ways, especially with AI, with all the outpouring of new AI tools. I get the temptation. And I'm not even completely convinced that that's the wrong answer. I wish I was more convinced, but sometimes I see it so much and I see these companies still growing anyways. And I'm like, do I just have too high of a set of expectations?
I mean, there is something to be said for like, I forget, there was somebody, I actually referenced her in a newsletter that I wrote recently, but there was someone who said a few years ago back on LinkedIn that she encourages her team to ship B plus content,
Mhm.
meaning like it has to be like, basically, don't kill yourself over making it A plus content. Like, it needs to be good, but it just needs to be good enough. It needs to be good enough to like make the person trust us, get over the bar. But I do think that when it's a total ripoff, when it really just does not even meet that bar, you just end up losing trust with people, and maybe the product is great and you're able to earn trust back in other ways, but you start in the negative, and why would you want to? And most of us who work in SaaS who have ever done a live product demo know that the product usually doesn't work right all the time, and that you want to start in the positive. You want to start like with some goodwill, so that when they get into the product, they already feel great about you, and they're like looking for ways to make your product more useful, because there are just a billion ways that people can respond to respond to the friction in a negative way, and just be like, oh, this is too hard to use, oh, I don't want to put in the work to figure this out.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely like my ethos is very much like, be transparent, deliver what you say you're going to deliver. Even if you are delivering a B plus product, then that's okay. Sometimes people just need a B plus product. Not I mean like there's these giants that like tech giants that have widely known products that most of us hate, but they still have a stranglehold. And so I don't think that the product needs to be perfect. I think that we just need to share the value of it, and as marketers and the content we provide, just set expectations, because that's where it falls apart, is when the expectation is set too high and then the deliver is too low. um but I personally feel very uncomfortable shipping, something that's lackluster. It
Yeah.
doesn't it makes me feel inadequate as a professional. I was like, "Ugh, this is embarrassing." But there's a huge temptation. And so kind of back to what you were mentioning about demand gen and hitting their quotas and getting those MQLs and the difference between someone who's an order taker just executing a creative brief and someone who's like, we have this strategic problem and this is how we can solve for it. And that's where I think especially like product marketing and content marketing are intertwined and like they are like best buddies, like just holding hands on a picnic. Um, so but at the same time, it depends on the organization side and the seniority of the talent. Um, Talk more about like how you've seen the different career paths or like tasks assigned to people, how you see it in like your ideal situation to answer for, if, avoiding the demand gen pitfalls.
Yeah, well, and I just
I
to
said a
kind of
lot.
clarify, yeah, you said a lot, which is great. I just to clarify, like, I also think we should be holding hands with demand gen on a picnic. I think it comes back to what you were saying about seniority and like who has more. Unfortunately, politics exist on most marketing teams. I've been at very few places where it really is a very flat structure. Obviously, like in my mind, that is actually pretty. I love collaborating and I want to sit with people and like figure out how we get the best idea to win. So in some places that's been the case and that is definitely an ideal scenario. And I actually think it works really well when different functions with different goals are able to then um, collaborate equally, right? So, like when demand gen is saying, hey, we have to move faster, we have to support sales, and we have to hit these numbers for growth, those are all very valid concerns and they're completely right. It's just that it needs to be tempered with, okay, great. But also, we want those people that we're reaching and that we're converting to talk to sales to come into those conversations already liking us. We want them to learn something about the product so that they're going to be better customers. Like it's really just like content marketing needs to come in there and think about, okay, we're going to achieve this goal, but also we're building for the next 6 goals, right? Like we're building for a long-term relationship with the customer. We're thinking on a different timeline. Um, so anyway, sorry, that's like just a
No, I
little
love
aside because
that.
I worked with some amazing, amazing demand gen professionals, and I definitely don't want to come off like, yeah, they're ruining marketing. Like they are not, absolutely not. They are whip smart. The best ones are whip smart and like business geniuses. And I want to be their best friends as a content professional.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure. And I mean, I think that one of the things you're talking about with like it, in any business decision, there needs to be a 49-51%. There needs to be someone that has that final decision making for in order to avoid social loafing. And that's not like
what's
that we're
social
loafing.
loafing?
Social loafing is this concept that is widely documented. So this is not Leanne's opinion. Basically, it's the scenario where imagine the story that's often told is imagine you're in an apartment building and every single person in that apartment building has their window open. Down on the street below, someone yells out help, and no one in that apartment building takes it upon themselves to call help because they think someone else did it. And you find this within teams is it's not that no one's trying to help it or no one cares, no one has empathy, no one has concern. It's not that they're like emotionally checked out. It's just that there needs to be a communicated and assigned decision maker so that people have that social expectation and there's not a power vacuum and there's not like, well, whose job is it? You said you were going to do it. It's not my job. I've got these other things to do. It needs to just be an expectation set.
Yes, I completely agree with that. Yeah, there needs to be accountability. There needs to be somebody who is the quarterback or yeah, I don't know, there's a directly responsible individual. Whatever your
Yeah.
team uses is that I totally agree with that. That there has to be somebody where like, okay, if we can't agree, I'm deciding and we're moving forward. I think what I'm in my to go back to your other question, um in my ideal scenario, that is just not always the same team. right? And I think that that is where the organizational structure can get really lopsided because the stuff that is the most measurable ends up with the most power, even though that's not always, those aren't always the tactics or the programs that are also the most impactful, right? Because it's easy to measure things that happen more quickly. It's easy to measure things where we're doing things like gating, which is sometimes actually creating a lot of friction or not doing what's best for the user. So I like to work with teams where we're not always measuring the exact same thing, where we have goals at the top of everything, and it's always going to be revenue, and that's not a bad thing. That's what like
That's how you run a
this
business.
exists. Yeah, exactly. That's what we're all here to do. Like we're helping the company make money. We're helping to sell, which is great. Um, but I do think that there are leading indicators, and I think most marketers are coming around to this now. But like there are leading indicators that aren't MQLs, right? There are leading indicators that show that you are inching towards a long-term success that helps you get more revenue. And I think it's been shown that higher brand affinity does end up being really it makes everything more effective. It ends up helping your company make more money in the long term, but it's really, really hard to measure. So my ideal scenario is with a head of marketing who understands that and who has set up the team in such a way where not every campaign is necessarily led by the same team, because I do think that that ends up like creating this sort of imbalance as well, and where there is a healthy debate, especially among the leaders, about which which philosophies to employ in any given moment. And I think it really does help if every leader is really bought into great content, because I've been on teams like that too. And when that happens, it's just magic for the content team, because it means that product marketing understands that we need to tell a bigger story around the product. And so like they're excited to work with you on what that's going to be. And demand gen understands that if we're going to drive, tens of thousands of registrants to an event, or leads from an ebook or something, whatever it is, like insert your particular tactic here. That's going to take a lot of investment on their side to distribute it. And then it's also going to mean that we're going to need something that's actually worth people's email address at the end. And so I do think it's like, it's getting around the idea that like these are the things that are important to our team and making sure that content is one. And then B, yeah, having a healthy debate between, okay, what's the most important thing in this given moment for to solve this problem? Should we be focusing on a short-term solution? Should we be focusing on short-term metrics? Should we be focusing on something longer term, something iterative? Just looking at all of the different tools in our marketing toolbox and making decisions accordingly, as opposed to each being really siloed in our function and not thinking beyond that to what works across all of marketing. Because we're all trying to do the same thing at the end of the day, right? We're trying to sell a product, we're trying to connect with customers, we're trying to create a good experience. And I think, yeah, so I guess that's what I'm looking for, is something, and that's what I feel like I've found, which I'm very excited about. But yeah, something where there is more of a all for one atmosphere, as opposed to many fiefdoms and we're fighting over it.
Yeah, and I love that analogy because it's a internal organization cultural thing, and, to your point is that, like, I I've existed in organizations where it's a complete black hole between advertising, brand motions, and the sale. Black hole. No nothing in the middle. And how do you decide what to do and what works? And when you're in that kind of situation, it's really easy to just call stuff expensive. Oh, content marketing is too expensive. Oh, it's going to cost us too much to do a blog. Oh, I don't know. A reel or video, that's too much money. Like we don't have it. You're wrong. You're wrong. You're unequivocally wrong. But that doesn't mean that you need to do all the content all the time for all the things. And I think being really choosy about your content and the story and having that strategic vision with it, hugely impactful.
Yeah. And actually, I'm glad you said that about measuring things because I think that that's also part of the danger of separating the content team from the strategic side of it, is that if someone else is measuring the content, then that it's very likely those insights aren't getting back to the content team quickly enough, and they should be influencing what you create next. And frankly, like I think every content marketer, or really anyone, any marketer, I'm going to say full stop, any marketer should be fully knowledgeable about the metrics that they're driving. If you don't have access to those, if you can't own those, then you can't make an argument for why to do one thing over another, because you do have to make an argument. Nothing is a given. Um, and yeah, I think that's a really great point, that like part of this is also just communication and all of us, being able to speak in terms that the other teams understand about why we think this is really important and is actually going to move the needle and push us all towards the larger goals.
Calvin agrees. Last touch attribution is a mess.
Yeah.
Um, but
Multi-touch.
But also to your point is that no one wants to put out something that's not resonating with the customer, and when you're divorced from the analytics, you can't say like, "Oh, there's not even an F shape on this page." Like no one's doing anything with it. They've just not even scrolled, they bounced. You need to have that information so you stop doing the stuff that no one cares about and
Yep.
wasting time, money, and effort.
Yeah.
And that's when things get expensive, is when you have no feedback loop.
Yep, I completely agree. Yeah, I'd much rather we do. I mean, I think I've heard this a lot and it often doesn't get done, but I'm going to say it again anyway. I'd much rather we do fewer things better and just measure them better, and pay more attention and take those feedback loops into account and make the thing better iteratively over time. And we can say it until we're blue in the face, but it's really hard to do when there are so many different pressures coming down on the team. But yeah, that's why I do feel like when content's in charge of that reporting, it's easier for them to pull that back into the actual work, as opposed to when they're just kind of being yelled at by a bunch of different departments.
Yeah, like, "Hey, I need this, and I
Yeah.
need you to put the CTA at the end." Okay, why? They don't like to hear the why unless you're involved in the conversation the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Sometimes they're right, but you're correct to ask why. We need to know why. And sometimes there was zero thought into it. Sometimes the why is, oh, because we did it this way last time. Like, well, how did that perform?
Yeah, what did it work?
Yeah.
And there's so much temptation, I think I was talking about this with, just a profoundly intelligent woman earlier today, and like just amazing pedigree, amazing like results, who was talking about even personal branding, about how to communicate ourselves past a one-dimensional resume, and how to do personal branding and what type of content to put out. And it comes back to content. If you want people to know stuff, you got to tell them.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
why we have a podcast that we're doing. You got to, like, if you want to like explore these conversations, these concepts, these ideas, you gotta talk it out in one platform, tactic, or another,
Or in several different platforms and tactics. Like,
usually.
yeah, I think how you found me is the LinkedIn post that I made about, being on the job hunt and basically like having left Vimeo and like being looking for my next thing. And that actually, so I'm like talking with, I'm very excited. Like I'm going to go on the podcast circuit. I got a lot of feedback on that. And one of the things that it made me realize was how much more attention I needed to put into the content that I'm putting out into the world on LinkedIn. Because when I am posting regularly about things that I care deeply about, the funniest thing happens. People ask me to be on podcasts to talk about that thing, as opposed to asking me to be on podcasts to talk about something I know nothing about, which has also happened to me before. But
Yeah,
it's like they don't know, like how would they know unless I had said something about it? The content mix matters.
it does, and conversely, when I have impulsively posted things on LinkedIn that, like, no one cares about, I'm not even sure I care about that deeply, I'm just, like, doing it for the sake of doing it, no one's gonna ask me to be a podcast about that. Like, no one I'm lucky if they even, like, 100 people even glanced at it. You have to be intentional. And that's why it matters what you do. And when you guide people to few things that are very specific, just like in our branding talks, it makes a world of difference.
It does. Yeah, 100%.
So we were talking about everything, and it seems like we had gotten through most of the disclaimers, but I want to make sure to cover it. If someone missed the point entirely about what we're saying here about how to organize the marketing department so that demand gen and content and products marketing and everybody is kind of vibing, what are some times where either that's not what we're talking about, or someone misinterprets it, or there's a myth, or it just doesn't apply? Like, if you're a marketing department, one person wide, what organization structure?
Yeah.
Um, but things like that.
Yeah, that's obviously an exception. And I mean, I would say even maybe under 5 people, right? Like this is like everyone has a pretty equal seat at the table. This probably doesn't apply. I'm definitely thinking about organizations I've been at which have been, 20 or more marketers, like quite a few people, some very senior people, and where there is sort of an actual, where there's politics between those people or also between marketing and other departments. Because I mean, I do think we often forget that we're also marketing what the marketing team is doing internally, because that can be a bit of a black box to product or to customer service or to other teams that also need to be on board with what we're doing. Um, but yeah, I think if you miss everything else, um, the main thing that I'm trying to say is that content should be strategic, and that marketing teams need to be based on shared outcomes. Marketing team strategy needs to be based on shared outcomes where everybody has a seat at the table, where everybody is able to see how their work contributes to that outcome, as opposed to where there's an outcome and it's been turned into an output goal for the content team, but it's not actually been explained that this is like the theory is that we're thinking this will lead to this other thing. Because oftentimes when we don't start to not see results, which is something I think is happening more and more often with gated content, with ebooks, with anything that is sort of has been abused in the past. I'll lump SEO content into that too. Like none of them are bad tactics. It's just that there have been so many bad iterations of all of them that it's made the entire playbook less effective. But I think that a lot of the issue with some of that is because the practitioners haven't actually been let in on what the full picture looks like, what we're trying to do. So at the end of the day, it's we have to be on the same team with a marketing strategy, and that's just something that gets harder as the team gets bigger. We have to communicate out what those outcomes actually are. And yeah, I think don't shortchange your brand and content teams. The people, who, whatever you call it, whatever the team at your company is that is in charge of the story or that is directly trying to solve customer problems, like make sure that they have a seat at the table. Make sure that you're listening to them. Make sure that they are strategically involved and not just filling orders.
Yeah. It changes the outcome of the how it's done so much when people have a more robust understanding of their mission. And when
Yes.
you and that's also part of having humans do it and not chat gpts. Chat gpt is a large language model that doesn't have a real brain. It's a baby, and maybe someday it'll be smart enough to do this, but it can't synthesize things, and it doesn't have the nuance that a person with a robust understanding of what the mission they're trying to accomplish and the expertise and experiences, like, it just can't replicate that.
Yeah.
Um, so the future, Chat GPT, we brought it up. We went there again and
Oh
again and
man.
again,
It's gonna come
but
up on every podcast from now until, I don't know,
until
chat
it's called
GP
something else.
next. Yeah, exactly.
But the future of marketing, where do you think it's going? And do you think that that's where it should go? Like, what do you think's on the horizon for us?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think we have to think about AI. I'm not gonna say ChatGPT in particular, but, uh, but I just think it hasn't come it well, not I think everyone would agree that it just hasn't come to maturation yet, so we don't really know what it's going to look like. I follow someone on LinkedIn, who said something about like bragging about AI in your product or bragging about using AI in your marketing in a few years is going to sound like bragging about having a website. It's so table stakes that it will sound silly. It's what we're all going to use. It's another tool at our disposal. And I agree with that. And I think it's like I'm really interested in finding ways to use it for things that I either am not very good at or just never have time for. So definitely in figuring out like what are the tools where it can help me interpret the results of my campaigns faster, right? What are the tools where it can help me audit thousands of pieces of content faster and find which ones actually need updating? Can it help me actually organize my research and like find the stats that I'm looking for, or figure out like if I do a big survey, like help me actually, turn those into stories more quickly. I think those are all things that smarter marketers than I have already figured out, or that people are going to be figuring out really soon. So there's absolutely a place for it, but I think that that's going to be really interesting in the next couple of years. This sort of as AI takes on more of those tools, I think what we'll be left with in the marketing stack and in on the marketing teams will be deep functional experience. So like product marketing, content marketing, um, where it's not necessarily channel specific, it's channel agnostic, and it's really about figuring out how to use what's at your disposal to meet business needs. So I think that those specialties will actually grow. And then I also think that anything that adds that human element to marketing, so that does like fall on the creative end of the spectrum, at least in my opinion. I think that that is going to be more and more in demand because it's really hard to fake. I know that ChatGPT started with writing poetry, but it was really bad poetry. And even some of the like, I thought the Sora videos that have come out are incredible, but that's like those are prompts coming from a very specific group of people. I'm skeptical of what we'll eventually see. I just think it's going to take some time. Um, but what's not going to change is that for it to actually sound like a person, it's going to need to tell real stories. And as of this podcast recording, people are still the only beings that can have those kinds of experiences and report back about them and get unique things from them. And I think that that's what we're seeing is that more and more what we're saying and how we're saying it is just as important as who's saying it, right? The brand, the personal brand behind it, and I think that that is going to continue.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that that's where learning on the past and being able to predict the future are two very different things. And large language models can look at the past, but they can't predict the future accurately yet. Maybe someone's working on that. Um, and I feel like it's almost like the same way that people abuse data science. Most data science and machine learning is a linear regression model. Like it's not some new math that we like that Excel like suddenly can do.
Right.
It's not magic. And on the last episode, Trevor Van Wart and I were talking about like magic is like how you actually create a category. Um, but at the same time, those are some really great uses that you listed. And I think that the human experience of these and also connecting back in Reddit that we were talking about earlier, you see the wildest things on the social media platform because the world is so unpredictable. The butterfly effect, like all these different things. Like it's so many variations and inputs and layers that you need a uniquely human story and delivery of it. And I love that we can still recognize when something's fake, like the uncanny valley thing. Um, I'm really curious to see how that moves forward. But I as a human for humans, um, I don't like doing tedious manual repetitive work, but at the same
Yep.
time, I would much rather like notes like a real story and not question the credibility of it.
Yeah. But I do think there's a marriage of both, right? Like there is a
Yeah,
place where you can bring that spark to the storytelling and still use AI to do some of the tedious manual work, make
absolutely.
things go faster. Yeah, I don't know. I'm excited about I think anytime there's a huge disruption, there is things always shake out differently than we expect them to, right? There are opportunities that open up. There are new jobs that we didn't even know were going to be jobs. And so I don't think at all that we're all necessarily going to be doing the same thing 2 years or 5 years from now. But also, I wouldn't want to do the same thing 2 years or 5 years from now. So I'm kind of cool with that. Let's
Yeah.
see what's happening.
Yeah, let's go on this adventure. Like I'm
Yeah.
ready to buckle up and I'm along for the ride. Um and it's fascinating to watch it in real time.
Yes. Yeah. It is pretty it's yeah, fascinating. I was trying to think of a better word. Fascinating is the perfect word. It is really, really fascinating watching it unfold.
Definitely. All right. So last question. This is the hardest one that we end with. What is a question that you wish people would ask you that people don't ask? And you can think of this as, either everyone asks you about XYZ and they really should talk about ABC, something personal, maybe it's something about Calvin. We don't know. What is something that someone should ask you?
People should definitely ask me more about Calvin. I no, you sent me this beforehand. I knew this question was coming, and I meant to ask you what other people's answers have been because I was like, "Oh, what is that?" But I forgot, so I'm just gonna wing it. Um, I what is a question that I wish people would ask me? I guess maybe a question I wish people would ask more often in general is I'm always interested in how people got into marketing and why they do what they do beyond the interest in the technical side. Someone reminded me recently as we were both recently on the job hunt, we were talking about it, that you should be able to like behind the mission of a company, you should be able to say like, oh yeah, the world would be a better place if that, like if they accomplished that mission. Even if it's something, even if it's just helping people make better videos or helping people grow their businesses or, like something that isn't necessarily, I don't think that means everyone has to drop what they're doing and go work for a social good company, although that'd be cool too. Um, but yeah, so I guess like maybe that, like what are like maybe the question is what are you passionate about outside of work or what do you think or why did you get into this work to begin with? Like why is this even interesting? I think
Yeah,
is an
well,
interesting question to ask people.
so like why did someone choose marketing? Like why marketing? Like this.
Yeah. For me, I went to school for journalism. And I was gung ho about being a magazine editor. I graduated school at a time when it was not a great time to be a magazine editor. And I quickly realized that most of the people who had that job had trust funds to fall back on, and I did not. And yeah, so I sort of fell into marketing and then as I was doing it just as a job, realized A, that it activated an analytical side of my brain that I hadn't realized I needed that was like so important to me. But then that it also it hit on a lot of those transferable skills that made me get into journalism in the first place. So I was able to interview people and tell their stories. I was able to, chase rabbit holes and find curiosities and like create narratives out of those. I was able to investigate things. I did feel like a lot of those things actually transferred. So for me, it was that. It was the fact that it made me feel like I could learn a lot about the world by learning deeply about different people in different professions and what actually helps them be better at that. So that was interesting to me. Just yeah, learning through by putting myself in lots of different people's places.
That's awesome. That's yeah, I mean like I think that's why we get along is that curiosity and the questioning and the rabbit hole chasing. And I think that there's so much, like, different overlapping industries with marketing and, journalism. Journalism is journalism and filmmaking or storytelling are the heart of marketing. And, I come from a STEM background. And so for me, I was missing that piece of creativity and that fun and that story, cuz I would always like gather with my friends and yeah, maybe it was gossiping, but it was story time. And so you like the journalistic aspect of being a content marketer specifically is huge. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I love that you mentioned filmmakers because I will always have a soft spot in my heart for filmmakers,
Yeah.
and I agree. I just think it's really interesting to think about the different ways that you can tell a story, and how a story can motivate people to change their behaviors or to think about the world in a different way, to see things from your point of view. I just think there's, I don't know. I guess I'm cautiously optimistic about the future of that in business. I think business can definitely be the thing that continues to fund it, but also that that's incredibly valuable for any business to be able to actually tell a story that people wanna listen to and help people see the vision of the world that they are trying to bring about, right? They created the product for a reason. So let's get people on board. Let's create a movement, not just a company.
Love it. Let's create a movement, not just a company. That's how you can tell if it's good marketing. Like, if you're just white noise, you are not creating a movement.
Nope.
Not happening. All right. Well, if someone wants to get a hold of you, you mentioned that you're on LinkedIn. Is that the best way? Could you tell us like how to spell your name correctly for those that do not see it visually?
Yes, yes. Yeah, LinkedIn is the best way. I used to be active on lots of other platforms, and I feel like it's just LinkedIn for me these days. But yeah, so it's LinkedIn/IN, obviously, and then Robyn, Robyn, and last name is Showers, spelled just like the rain, Showers.
Wonderful. And if anyone wants to get a hold of me, it's info at markigy.com. And, we always love to hear it. Definitely reach out if you have questions or get a hold of either of us. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. This was so fun.